A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at WION.com.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
On the next episode of World of Africa, election season kicks off in South Africa. African National Congress ANC and main opposition party launch their manifestos for the May elections, in which some pollsters suggest ANC's share of the vote could fall below 50% for the first time. West African ECOWAS bloc mulls new strategy, revokes sanctions for Niger, and seeks to persuade junta-led countries to restore democracy and remain in the alliance. And meet a South African mom who is using TikTok to teach young children their native language or mother tongue. Watch World of Africa at these times only on WION. World is one.
Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Isha Hanspal. A week of war, protests and elections grip the region. Israeli forces target hungry Gazans waiting for aid. The Israel-Lebanon border remains on edge with fear of war lingering in the air. Iran goes to polls amidst sanctions and economic crisis. We bring you all these stories and more in this episode. War-induced starvation in Gaza took an ugly turn when hungry Palestinians waiting for aid were fired upon by Israeli forces. The tragedy that left at least 100 dead and have now cast a shadow over ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. Our next report gets you all the details here.
For thousands of Palestinians, securing food during times of war-induced starvation in Gaza is a daily struggle. With the war into its 5th month, The fight to secure a meal and stay alive in overcrowded refugee camps has become the new normal for 1.8 million displaced civilians in the enclave. But what unfolded in Gaza City on Thursday was a horrifying sight. The morning of February 29th had turned into a bloody massacre. At roughly 4 a.m. local time, more than 100 civilians were killed while waiting for critical supplies. In a horrific turn of events, Israeli forces opened fire at the refugees, triggering chaos and frenzy that resulted in more than 700 getting injured. Witness accounts from Palestinians and journalists in the area reveal that Israeli tanks fired on people that were simply waiting to receive aid.
We went to get food and flour, and they started shooting us. Then we threw ourselves into the streets, and no one looked for us. Eventually people brought us here. There are martyrs lying around, and no one is looking for them. Some need first aid, but there is none available. Al-Shifa is full of injured and martyrs, and there are no medics. They brought us to Kamal Adwan Hospital because there was no one to help us.
But the Israeli side has a different story to tell. As the shocking news of the incident began making headlines, Israeli authorities claimed that aid trucks plowed into waiting Palestinians, and the resulting stampede is what killed people.
Surely see this in some of the videos that the IDF have distributed. At some point, the trucks were overwhelmed, and the people driving the trucks, which were Gazan civilian drivers, plowed into the crowds of people, ultimately killing, my understanding is, tens of people. I don't have anything more specific to that. It is unfolding.
Hours after the horrific incident, a few Israeli officials admitted that their forces had indeed fired at the crowd. The reason given for the IDF's action was that Israeli soldiers thought that Palestinians rushing towards the aid trucks posed a threat. While Gaza remains crippled under a humanitarian crisis triggered by Israeli offensive in the enclave, the latest tragedy has sent global shockwaves. On the diplomatic front, Palestinian ambassador to the UN lashed out at Israeli counterparts while addressing a UN conference on the current situation in the Palestinian territories.
Hundreds of Palestinian civilians in northern Gaza, in Al-Rashid, at the Nablisi roundabout, who were awaiting for trucks loaded with humanitarian aid. They were bombed by the occupying power. Until now, more than 160 martyrs. More than 1,000 people have been wounded, many of them very seriously wounded. Are these human shields? Are these Hamas combatants?
وأكثر من 1000 جريح معظمهم في حالة الخطر.
As the day progressed, many Gazans who lined up in the hope to receive a bag of flour were seen carrying bodies of those seriously wounded or worse, killed in the incident. With no indications of a slowdown in Israeli aggression, all eyes are on the high-stakes ceasefire talks that now face a potential complication. Even Israel's biggest ally has taken a step back from an earlier statement of awaiting positive news on the ceasefire negotiations. US President Joe Biden hinted at a potential roadblock in his latest remarks concerning the talks.
Hope springs eternal. I was on the telephone with the people in the region. I'm still, probably not by Monday, but I'm hopeful.
Qatar's authorities had earlier revealed hope for a ceasefire before the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The country has been a key mediator in brokering talks between the two sides ever since Israel declared war on Gaza following the October 7 attack. But the latest incident has triggered fears that talks might be suspended.
A brimming second front of war. Now tensions at the Israel-Lebanon border remain high. Both sides are on edge over a spurt of missile strikes that killed yet another top Hezbollah leader. Will the exchange turn into a full-blown war? And does Israel have plans to ramp up its strikes? Our next story gets you the details.
While Gaza crumbles under ramifications of Israel's military operations, tensions continue to escalate along the Israel-Lebanon border as well. In the past week, Hamas' presence in Lebanon has carried out numerous missile strikes aimed at the border town of Kiryat Shmona in Israeli territory. No casualties have been reported in the targeted attacks. On the other hand, Israeli forces struck parts of southern Lebanon and also claimed to eliminate a top Hezbollah leader. While the bordering areas between both nations remains on edge, Israeli strikes have hit targets deeper in the Lebanese territory, a move that Hezbollah says it will respond to.
Its aggression on Baalbek or any other areas will not remain without response, and the resistance will choose the response in the appropriate way. And this is not words for the media. This is a commitment from the head of this resistance and from the mujahideen of this resistance.
The escalation between Israeli forces and the Lebanese militant group has raised global concern. U.S. officials have revealed their apprehensions that in the coming months, Israel may launch a ground operation in Lebanon. Washington's worry rests on the assumption that a diplomatic passage might not be enough to make Hezbollah retreat from the ongoing tension. However, Lebanon's top leaders hope for a different outcome in the coming months.
We are saying, God willing, if we are able to reach a cessation of military activities in Gaza, then I believe that we will have ahead of us weeks packed with negotiations, so that we can reach what I have always called long-term stability in the south of Lebanon.
As fear of an impending war looms in Lebanon, its people are looking for ways to curb their anxiety and escape the tensions. The country's snow-clad mountains offer a temporary way out for those struggling with war anxiety and regional instability.
The ongoing war and the Israeli raids on southern areas have a profound impact on us. We hear the sounds of bombardments at home in Shechem, and at school, we are constantly anxious as innocent students lose their lives. Therefore, I wish for everyone to have the opportunity to go out and enjoy in order to escape from the fear they are living in.
The circumstantial travels have raised demands at ski resorts and other scenic locations across Lebanon. But the rising footfall in the country's hilly terrain is not just any other seasonal getaway. Many have resorted to skiing and other sports to keep their mental health in check, while also breaking away from the fear of a possible all-out war. The report, WION World is One.
Amid Western sanctions, inflation and the threat of regional war spillover, Iran goes to elections. While the run-up to polls painted a dismal picture of low voter turnout, Iran's supreme leader has urged voters to exercise their rights. Will the shadows of the 2022 mass protests have any ramifications on the political mandate? Here's a report.
Iran's double elections are under the spotlight. Voters are casting their ballot in two separate polls, parliamentary elections and a separate voting process for the Assembly of Experts. The first determines who sits in the 290-member parliament. The second chooses leaders in the 88-member body that selects Iran's supreme leader. But the country's highly anticipated polls in times of a regional crisis and the war in Gaza are faced with a new challenge: low voter turnout. Iran's voters appear to be less than convinced of the promises made to them, the most important of them being a fight against corruption and stabilizing the country's economy.
Currently, the people's unwillingness to take part in the elections is mostly because they are hearing a lot of lies and fabrications, and they have lost their trust in voting.
Polls conducted by state media reveal that over 50% of the respondents are indifferent to the elections. From US pulling out of Iran's nuclear deal in 2018, to countrywide protests and clampdown on women's rights in 2022 following the custodial death of Mahsa Amini. The past few years have been tumultuous for the Islamic Republic. Sanctions by the West have also triggered an economic crisis in the country, raising the cost of living for Iranians.
The previous ones made promises, but nothing changed. Just take a look at the bazaar and the poor kids living on the streets. We need an official who takes action, not just campaigns.
Iran's critics and several human rights organizations believe that elections in the country are not free and fair anymore. Over the years, Iran's Guardian Council, which approves a candidate's eligibility, has been accused of engineering the elections. In the current polls as well, the council made headlines for announcing a final list of candidates barely 2 weeks before polling day. This in addition to Iran's coalition of reformist parties boycotting the elections, calling them ineffective.
The majority of people sent a clear message to the ruling system, but they felt that their message was not heard well or heard at all when sent through ballot boxes. So this time around, most of them chose another mechanism. I believe the main reason is that the parliament has been weakened and its role has been reduced.
However, in the midst of all criticism, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has called on voters to come out in large numbers and cast their ballot. Banners and campaign posters also beckon the people to come out and exercise their right. While many seem unmoved by the election process, there still remain a few voices hopeful to bring about change through the elections.
Based on the events that are happening in the region and also the threats made by Iran's enemies, people's participation in the elections will neutralize all these threats.
Now, away from the epicenter of war, Turkey witnesses massive rallies in support of Kurdish political prisoners. Why did Turkey's largest ethnic minority take to the streets? And what are their demands from Turkish authorities? Take a look.
The streets of Istanbul are buzzing. Last week saw hundreds from the Kurdish community stepping out for a pro-Kurdish rally in support of political prisoners, jailed by Turkish authorities over several years. At the center of attention in the march was Abdullah Öcalan, the founder of Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. Öcalan, a notable yet controversial figure in Turkey, is credited with leading the Kurdish movement for statehood. But for 25 years now, he has been languishing in solitary confinement.
I believe that this year, either in this election or in this process that awaits us, we will take a big step in our freedom process as we represent the unity of peoples. We believe that the big step we take will be a great struggle for the Kurdish people's leader, Mr. Abdullah Öcalan, and all other prisoners.
For many, he is an icon, also referred to as Apo or uncle. As for the Turks, they consider the 75-year-old as a bebek katili, or baby killer. The former guerrilla is accused for bombing civilians, for which Turkey had sentenced him to death. But after the country abolished capital punishment in 2004, Öcalan has been confined to an isolation cell on the İmralı prison island, located south of Istanbul. The demands for releasing Kurdish political prisoners is not new. Several human rights groups and thousands of Kurds have repeatedly called on the Turkish establishment to free wrongfully detained Kurdish politicians. Most of the leaders face prosecution and years-long incarceration over political speech that has primarily revolved around pushing for Kurdish autonomy.
May neither soldiers nor the Kurdish people become martyrs. Some people want discrimination, but we do not. Our people in prison have been there for years. We cannot get any news from them. We demand the opportunity to be able to hear from them.
The Kurds are seen as one of the world's largest communities that is stateless. Following the decline of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, millions of Kurds were left without a region of their own, leading to the rise of hardline nationalist parties that pushed for Kurdish statehood. However, despite years of Kurdish insurgency and endless rounds of talks with the Turkish establishment, the question of autonomy for Turkey's largest ethnic minority remains unanswered.
Inclusivity challenges faced by persons with disabilities are a global issue. But one man in Jordan has made it his mission to improve communication for the hearing impaired in his country, using his own lived experience. Our next story tells you all about this Jordanian YouTuber.
This is Mamoun Aoude. The 36-year-old is a father to 2 children. But parenthood for Aoude is not an ordinary journey. A hearing impairment pushed the Jordanian to create a children's show for people with hearing disabilities. Aoude, along with his wife, created a YouTube channel that is dedicated to teach sign language to children using animated cartoons. And at the heart of this step towards inclusivity is a personal obstacle in parent-child communication.
The goal for learning how to create animations was that there were no programs for hearing impaired children. There are no 3D characters, and this was my idea, along with my wife, to make 3D characters until we came up with the Tameen and Dream project. And we produced the characters in the beginning of the year 2022.
The father of 2 had no prior experience in creating an animated learning series. He took training during spare time to learn animation and also brought his son on board to voice one of the characters he created.
We aspire that in the future, Tameen and Dream will be the first, meaning the best Arab platform to provide beneficial information to children with hearing impairment, because most children who have hearing impairments have hearing parents. So, the parents do not know sign language or do not know what they can offer to these children. So, God willing, we aim for this platform to be dedicated to this group and that they will be able to communicate with them.
While Jordan has special laws in place to provide reasonable accessibility for persons with disabilities, the reality is starkly different. A report by Higher Council for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities reveals that systematically insufficient services are offered for PWDs. Aoude's YouTube channel is a leap in the right direction, aiming to break the communication barrier.
On the sidelines of the raging war in Gaza, hundreds of Palestinians continue to languish in Israeli prisons. Loved ones have no way to stay connected with the prisoners. But one radio station in West Bank's Ramallah is pulling out all stops to relay emotional messages to the prisoners. Take a look.
The messages vary from a prisoner's mother and wife to a child who doesn't speak yet, but tries to communicate by crying and laughing. Even if the words are unintelligible, the families try to convey them to the prisoner who longs to hear the child's voice.
Some prisoners who get released from the occupation prisons inform us that there is a device in a cell at a prison that the occupation authorities don't know about. They transmit the message from and to until the message reaches that specific person. So it is heard through one person inside the prison, and this detainee delivers the message to the person concerned. This may take more than 3 or 4 days until the first person meets the second person, but in the end the message reaches them.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. We will be back next week with more stories from the region. Bye-bye.
India's Global Voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one. Everyone loves a contest. But sport isn't just about victory and defeat. When the goats in sport speak, you hear it first on WION.
You have to play good cricket over a period of time.
I actually pushed myself right out of the damn tournament.
We go beyond the stats. Our stories are quoted the world over.
At WION, sport is part of our DNA. Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation